Judge Richard Posner, a man whose gaze alone could unnerve the sharpest legal minds, slowly leaned back in his chair. His brow lifted. His eyes, sharp as ever, flicked to the woman standing before him. He paused, then said just one word. "Impressive." The air shifted. No rustle, no whisper. Just the weight of that single word. For a man known for dismantling egos without blinking, it was as close to stunned admiration as this courtroom had ever heard. Cameras, frozen mid-pan, caught it all. A flicker of surprise crossed the face of the prosecutor, and at the center of it Rep. Jasmine Crockett, shoulders squared, eyes steady, unshaken. You're probably wondering how we got here. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not to her. She wasn't supposed to hold the room hostage, with a voice calm enough to slice steel. She wasn't supposed to reverse the narrative with one airtight sentence after another. And Judge Posner? He certainly wasn't supposed to say that, but he did. And if you missed the exact moment she turned the entire hearing on its head, don't worry, we've got it. Every word, every glance, every move that transformed a congressional ambush into a televised reckoning. What Jasmine Crockett delivered wasn't just a defense. It was a dismantling of lies, of posturing, of the quiet expectation that women like her, black, brilliant, unapologetically defiant, would stay quiet under pressure. She didn't flinch. She fought. And in doing so, she left a federal judge, speechless, and an entire political machine scrambling to recover. But that wasn't the beginning. To understand the silence, the stare, and that single word, we need to go back. To the moment this all started. To the calculated bait. The smirking. Interruption. The moment they thought they had her cornered. Because what happened next didn't just surprise the courtroom. It redefined it. And it all began with a mistake they didn't know they were making. To understand why the courtroom fell silent, we need to rewind. This wasn't just another hearing. The committee room was packed wall to wall. Cameras lined the back like vultures, red lights blinking, hungry for a soundbite. C-SPAN was live. Twitter was locked in. This wasn't background noise, this was a stage. At the center of it, Rep. Jasmine Crockett, seated alone at the witness table, binder closed, hands folded, waiting. The hearing was billed as a budgetary oversight session, but everyone knew what it really was. A spectacle, a pressure test, a trap. The congressman across from her, let's call him what he was. The antagonist hadn't come to discuss policy. He came to perform. His opening statement dripped with condescension, barely cloaked in procedural language. Words like accountability and transparency tossed like grenades across the table. But the audience he played to wasn't in the room. It was online, in echo chambers already primed to cheer his every jab. And then, just minutes in, the game began. He interrupted before she finished a sentence. He smirked as she cited legal precedent. He repeated buzzwords. Taxpayer dollars, racial division, radical agenda. He wasn't seeking clarity. He was baiting her. Because that was the strategy: provoke her, disrupt her, push her into a soundbite they could replay out of context. A single flash of frustration that could be clipped, labeled, shared. Unhinged, emotional, unfit. It was political theater, but beneath the choreography ran a deeper current. This wasn't just a battle of budget lines or footnotes. This was about race, about gender, about power. The unspoken question behind every word. Who do you think you are? Who does a black woman from Texas think she is speaking with authority, refusing to defer, refusing to shrink? Who does she think she is, holding her ground in a space built to erase her? The stakes were unspoken, but undeniable. This was more than partisan bickering. This was a test of representation, of whether truth could survive in a room designed to distort it. of whether dignity could hold its own against derision. Jasmine knew this. You could see it in her posture, in the way she waited for her turn to speak, never rushing, never rattled. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was precision, because she understood something the cameras didn't show. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it waits. And as the antagonist circled, confident and smug, you could almost see it, the assumption in his eyes, that she would fold, that she would stumble, that she'd be overwhelmed by the moment, as so many before her had been, not because they weren't capable, but because the game was rigged from the start. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing that game. She came prepared not just with facts, but with fire, not just with data, but with dignity. And as the congressman leaned forward, pressing again, louder now, more animated, trying to provoke, trying to own the moment, he couldn't see it yet. But the dynamic had already shifted, because the reels headline wasn't being written in his voice. It was forming in hers. She wasn't cornered, she was waiting. But their mistake? They underestimated the woman they were facing. Before the silence, before the stare, before the word impressive reshaped the room, there was him. Congressman Blake Harwell. A man who never asked questions unless he already had the answer, or at least the headline. He'd carved a reputation for himself as the right's silver bullet, a fast-talking, camera-ready bulldog who knew how to go viral before he knew how to legislate. Suits too crisp, smirk too casual, voice always 2 octaves above reason. To his base, he was the last line of defense against what they called the cultural collapse. To his critics, he was a walking press release. Shallow, performative, smug. But to himself, he was untouchable. He'd made a career of cornering witnesses, not with facts, but with spectacle. His weapon wasn't logic. It was volume, timing, disruption. The clip mattered more than the truth. And if you gave him a second of stumble, a flicker of fluster, he'd pounce. C-SPAN footage from a year ago showed him interrupting a labor organizer mid-sentence, wagging a finger while quoting a misrepresented stat. The video, clipped and posted by his comms team, was retweeted 30,000 times. Caption: Boom, Harwell shuts it down. 2 months later, he grilled a Department of Education official on curriculum policy, accusing them of brainwashing children, a soundbite made for Outrage TV. He never let the official respond. He didn't have to. The clip was the product, and, behind it all, a loyal fan base cheered him on. Twitter was his arena, Instagram his highlight reel. Telegram groups with thousands of followers called him the House Hammer. Pundits called him the right's rising star. He liked that one. He'd grown accustomed to the rhythm. Talk over, interrupt, smirk, clip, trend, repeat. So when the Oversight Committee announced the hearing schedule and Jasmine Crockett's name landed on his docket, he didn't blink. Another target, another performance, another clip to feed the algorithm. His prep wasn't about policy. It was about optics. He'd picked out the phrases in advance. Soft on accountability, race-baiting politics, weaponizing identity. Words engineered not to uncover truth but to provoke. And he was certain it would work, because it always had. Because every time he'd gone up against someone like Crockett, bold, progressive, unafraid, they'd either match his fire and fall into the trap or try to stay calm and get buried in the noise. He saw their values as weaknesses, their nuance as fragility. He didn't prepare for precision. He prepared for volume. The morning of the hearing, he posted a photo of the chamber, with the caption, "Today we ask the real questions. Enough with the dodge and dance politics." His base flooded the comments. "Let's go. Expose them. Time to cook." His team had already drafted the tweet for after the hearing. Took the gloves off, Dems weren't ready. But the gloves never came off, because what he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that Jasmine Crockett had been studying him. Not just his tone, but his timing. Not just what he said, but what he never said. She knew the bait. She'd seen the clips. She wasn't just prepared for his attack, she was already planning the counterstrike. And as Harwell entered that chamber, shoulders squared, tie tightened, performance mode activated, he thought he knew exactly how the story would end. He didn't, because this wasn't another clip in his montage. This wasn't another witness to bulldoze. This wasn't another viral own. This was Jasmine Crockett, a woman who knew that truth doesn't always shout, that sometimes it waits sharp, quiet, unflinching until the perfect moment. And Harwell, in all his bravado, walked right into it. But Crockett wasn't just ready, she was waiting. Long before the courtroom applause, long before the viral takedown. Jasmine Crockett was just a girl with a notebook, a backpack, and questions no one wanted to answer. She was raised in the heat of Texas, not in marble buildings, but in church basements, school parking lots, and crowded kitchens where bills were counted down to the dollar. Her parents didn't preach politics. They preached survival. Work hard. Stay honest. Speak up, even when your voice shakes. By the time she was a teenager, Jasmine had already learned what the world expected of her and what it didn't. They didn't expect her to challenge authority. They didn't expect her to lead protests. They definitely didn't expect her to become a lawyer. But she did. At law school, she was the one who asked the questions professors tiptoed around. She took on unpaid internships in legal aid clinics, while classmates chased corporate salaries. She sat with tenants facing eviction, immigrants terrified of deportation, families clinging to hope in a system built to grind it down. And when protests erupted in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in her own backyard, Jasmine didn't just tweet support, she showed up. Megaphone in hand, clipboard under her arm. She wasn't there for the photo op. She was there to organize. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. There were nights when the courthouse lights dimmed and she was still scribbling motions by lamplight. Days when she'd spend hours defending clients, only to be blindsided by a system that was deaf to truth. She watched friends sell out for access. Colleagues who once marched beside her quietly shifted their tone when donors came calling. There was betrayal. Deep betrayal. From people she thought were allies. Mentors who warned her to tone it down. Consultants who told her, "There's no appetite for what you represent." And still, she kept going. Not because she had a plan, but because she had people counting on her single mothers, young activists, voters who didn't speak the language of Washington, but knew the meaning of struggle. She didn't enter politics because she craved the spotlight. She stepped forward because no one else would. The district she ran for was considered unflippable. The money wasn't there. The endorsements? Non-existent. But door by door, block by block, story by story, she built something no strategist could measure. Trust. She won. And when she took the oath, it wasn't about pride. It was about proof that a woman with fire in her voice and justice in her heart could walk into rooms designed to exclude her, and take her seat anyway. From that day forward, she became a different kind of representative. The kind who didn't just vote the right way, but spoke the truth even when it was inconvenient. Especially when it was inconvenient. They mocked her tone. They clipped her passion into punchlines. They rolled their eyes when she used words like systemic. But what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that every word she spoke had been earned, through tears, through fights, through the 1,000 moments she'd been told to sit down, and chose instead to stand up. So when Jasmine Crockett entered that congressional hearing binder in hand, chin high, she wasn't just walking into another debate. She was walking into a room she had fought to even exist in. And as Congressman Harwell prepared to steamroll her with his rehearsed lines, his camera angles, his contempt barely concealed, Jasmine saw it for what it was. Familiar, because this wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. Not by the boys in debate club who laughed until she won first place. Not by the firm that told her she was too passionate for litigation. Not by the mayor's aide who said her campaign was a nice idea. They'd all made the same mistake. They thought fire meant fragility. They thought humility meant weakness. They thought a woman like Jasmine Crockett would break before she ever burned them down. But fire doesn't flinch, and neither did she. She'd been here before, not in this exact chair, not with these same lights, but in battle after battle, where the goal wasn't just to win, it was to be allowed to speak at all. She had faced more than disrespect. She had faced erasure, and she learned early on that the most dangerous weapon in any room was not anger. It was clarity. So when the attacks came, the interruptions, the insinuations, the smirking disdain masked as questions, she didn't flinch. She smiled. Congressman Harwell leaned forward, his voice sharp, tinged with a false calm. Congresswoman Crockett, would you say your advocacy aligns with fiscal responsibility, or is it more about emotional appeal? The bait dangled slick with arrogance. Jasmine didn't blink. I'd say ensuring constitutional rights is the furthest thing from emotional. It's fundamental. But Harwell pressed on, louder now. Then how do you explain your support of policies that balloon spending without oversight? Sanctuary programs, discretionary funds, criminal justice reforms that restore lives? She interrupted, eyes locked on his. That save the state millions in long-term incarceration costs? A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He pushed a stack of papers forward, waving them like a sword. According to these figures you cherry-picked, she cut in. That report's footnotes explicitly mention external cost reductions, but I'm guessing you didn't make it past page 6. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Harwell scoffed, trying to recover. Let's stay focused. You've defended individuals accused of violent offenses. Are those the restored lives you mean? Jasmine's jaw tensed, but her tone remained steady. I defend the Constitution, Congressman, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's politicized, especially then. He tried a smirk. Some would say it's convenient to defend those cases. Makes for great headlines. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make the room lean closer, too. You know what makes great headlines? Calling yourself tough on crime while voting to defund after-school programs in the same zip codes you claim to protect. Judge Posner shifted in his seat. The smirk vanished. Harwell stumbled. This isn't about, isn't it? She said, calm now, controlled. You invoked my record. Let's invoke yours. And just like that, the trap was set. Jasmine began laying out a timeline votes Harwell had cast that contradicted his stated values. Funding he'd blocked. Hearings he'd skipped. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. The facts landed like blows. His posture stiffened. His fingers tapped the desk. The rhythm of control was slipping. Still, he tried one last angle. You've suggested race plays a role in budget policy. Isn't that a little divisive? Jasmine exhaled, slow. What's divisive is pretending race doesn't play a role in anything. That's not analysis, that's denial. And the room went still. Judge Posner leaned in, his chin resting on his knuckles. Harwell looked toward the cameras, but no salvation came. His usual rhythm, jab, deflect, dominate, had collapsed under the weight of her precision. You speak. In sound bites, she said. I speak in lived experience. That's not a debate. That's a mismatch. The silence thickened. Someone in the back coughed. Aide whisper, pen tap. Nothing else. Every eye was on her now. Even the ones that came expecting not to be. She wasn't just countering. She was constructing. Brick by brick, argument by argument, until there was no exit left for him that didn't look like retreat. Harwell opened his mouth, then closed it, too late. Then she dropped the line that would echo through the chamber. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound the table. She didn't wave papers. She didn't perform. She simply straightened her spine, looked Congressman Harwell in the eye, and said, "Let's begin." No one expected what came next. Jasmine, Crockett, in a tone laced with calm finality, reached for the printout he had slid toward her minutes earlier, the one he'd brandished like a weapon. She held it up, glanced down, then turned it slowly to face the room. "This document," she said, "has been quoted 3 times in this hearing. Each time, the quote has been misleading, partial, or deliberately out of context. Let me read. It fully so we can stop pretending confusion is the same thing as criticism." She read the paragraph aloud, steady, unfaltering, her voice slicing through the chamber like the edge of a scalpel. The real context reversed his entire implication. Someone, at the press table, whispered, "Oh." Harwell adjusted his mic, fumbling slightly. "The interpretation—" Crockett cut him off, not with aggression, but with finality. "You didn't read it. You weaponized it. And now that it's no longer useful to your narrative, you want to debate tone." She moved to the next point. "The claim that I supported reckless spending based on what? A line item from a bill you opposed but didn't even debate? I have your voting record, sir. You missed the amendment session entirely. So either you didn't do your job, or you're hoping no one here did theirs." A low rose from the back row. Someone shifted in their seat. Harwell opened his mouth. She didn't stop. "You talk about defending taxpayers, yet you voted against infrastructure for your own district. You talk about justice, but you've never once co-sponsored a single reform bill despite rising incarceration rates among your own constituents." The smirk that had shadowed his face for the first half of the hearing was gone, replaced with something colder, something smaller. Jasmine turned to the committee chair. "May I continue?" The chair nodded, stunned. She stood, and for a moment, the entire room changed. She wasn't just a representative anymore. She was a litigator, a witness, a teacher, a force. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about the millions of people who look like me, who've been talked over, cut off, misquoted, and misrepresented for generations. Every time I speak, I carry their stories. Their names don't trend on Twitter, but their lives matter. In this record." You could hear pens freeze mid-scratch. Judge Posner leaned forward, elbow resting on the bench, face unreadable but riveted. Jasmine's tone softened, just barely. "And let's be clear, I didn't come here to be polite to your talking points. I came to be honest. You asked about accountability? Here it is." Then came the shift, not in her voice, but in the room. The aides behind Harwell were still now, eyes locked on her. The photographers moved slower, more precise, as if capturing not a moment but history. Social media lit up, even before she finished. "Yo! She is cooking this dude." Jasmine Crockett about to enter her final form. Judge Posner's face, through a TikTok clip of the first 30 seconds of her rebuttal, would cross 1.2 million views before the hearing even ended. And still, she wasn't done. Crockett returned to Harwell. "You want to talk about performance? Let's. Because what you're doing right now is theater. You pretend concern for communities you never visit. You quote data you don't understand. You speak over people whose lives you couldn't last a day living." She let it hang. No one interrupted. "You don't see people. You see props. You don't ask questions. You look for traps. You don't want the truth. You want the clip." Judge Posner blinked slowly. Harwell looked down. "Finally." Then she delivered it. The line that no one watching, not in the room, not online, not at home, would forget. "I was elected to defend the truth," she said, her voice calm, resolute, ringing like a bell through marble and ego. "Not your performance." Silence, not awkward, not strained, reverent. The kind of silence that doesn't just mark the end of a statement, it confirms a shift in power. Posner leaned back in his chair. His lips parted slightly. A moment passed. Then he nodded. Slowly. Once. Someone exhaled. Someone else clapped once before remembering decorum. Crockett sat back down, straightened her binder, didn't gloat, didn't glance at Harwell, because it wasn't for him. It never was. It was for the people who watched her walk into that chamber alone, and now watched her walk out having said the thing they were never allowed to say. This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. And yet, the fallout. No one expected that. It didn't take long. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the hearing room, her phone was already vibrating non-stop. Staffers glanced at each other, wide-eyed, as they tried to keep pace with the incoming flood of notifications. She had come to speak truth, but she'd just detonated a political moment. On TikTok, the clip of her final line, "I was elected to defend the truth, not your performance," was already trending under the sound name truthbomb.wave. Creators added slow-motion edits, background music, even animated transitions. Within hours, over 80,000 duets flooded the platform. One stitched version, set to a swelling gospel choir, racked up 2.3 million views by midnight. On Twitter, the reaction was even more volcanic. Jasmine Crockett just baptized that man in logic and left him speechless. Congressional hearings need to be a pay-per-view event if she keeps this up. The look on Judge Posner's face? Iconic. Crockett clapped back, hit trending status by late afternoon. By nightfall, it was #1 nationwide. Cable news anchors replayed the moment on loop. CNN's headline, Chiron, read, "Crockett versus Harwell. Who really won?" MSNBC's Rachel Maddow called it the rhetorical equivalent of a knockout in round 3. Even a Fox News panel, visibly uncomfortable, admitted she held her own perhaps too well. And then came Judge Posner. Typically silent outside the bench, Posner issued a rare post-hearing comment. It was brief, but devastating. One of the most cogent and well-constructed defenses I've heard in years. Thoughtful, surgical, unshaken. That quote alone made headlines. Federal judge breaks. Silence to praise Crockett's testimony was splashed across every major outlet from Politico to Rolling Stone. Meanwhile, Congressman Harwell was nowhere to be seen. His office released a vague statement the following morning. The congressman remains committed to accountability and transparency and encourages robust dialogue on the issues. It was generic, hollow, and the internet wasn't having it. Someone screenshotted the statement and captioned it. Translation: "She cooked me, and I got nothing." Memes poured in. A split-screen image of Crockett's composed expression. And Harwell's blinking silence was captioned. How it started. How it's going. Another simply read, "He brought a tweet to a thesis fight, but beyond the jokes, something deeper had taken root." Crockett wasn't just trending, she was resonating. People who had never watched a hearing before were now quoting her. Parents were sending the clip to their kids. Young black girls were recording reactions, beaming. Immigrant activists called it a rare moment of dignity under attack. Teachers played the clip in civics class. And from Oakland to Chicago to Houston, murals began to appear, stylized street art featuring her words, her poise, her fire. Requests for interviews flooded in. The View, Pod Save America, The Breakfast Club, even 60 Minutes. Political action committees quietly reached out with funding offers. Some floated the idea of a statewide run. Others whispered something bigger. And still, Jasmine remained steady. In her first post-hearing statement, she didn't gloat. She didn't dunk. She thanked her team, her constituents, and everyone who's ever been talked over but kept speaking anyway. One line stood out. "I didn't show up to trend. I showed up to tell the truth." That people connected with it? that just shows how starved we are for honesty. The line hit hard. It was screenshotted, printed, quoted on air. Even Stephen Colbert included it in his opening monologue. And somewhere in all the noise, Congressman Harwell tried to reassert control, releasing a follow-up video in which he blamed partisan editing and social media spin. But the damage was done. His words sounded rehearsed. His tone? Defensive. The contrast was brutal because Crockett hadn't needed edits. She hadn't needed spin. The raw footage spoke for itself. And now she was more than a representative. She was a symbol, a reminder that truth, delivered clearly and unapologetically, still has the power to shake walls and silence noise. But even as the internet buzzed, and the headlines raved, Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, because what Jasmine did next elevated the moment into a movement. Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate in the hallway. She didn't fist pump or smile for the cameras or wait for the applause to catch up with the moment. She gathered her binder, adjusted her jacket, and walked, with the same calm dignity she brought into the chamber. Later that evening, in a quiet interview on a grassroots live stream, not a cable network, not a PR rollout, she finally spoke. "They didn't come for me," she said. "They came for everything I represent." And suddenly the moment wasn't just viral, it was personal. Because everyone watching, everyone who had ever been underestimated, interrupted, dismissed, they saw themselves in her words. She spoke directly to them. To the black girls in debate class who were told to tone it down. To the first-generation students who had to translate legalese before dinner. To the working-class parents who voted for people they hoped might finally speak their truth. "They tried to make me small," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I don't walk into rooms alone. I walk in with every ancestor, every activist, every young leader who ever dared to raise their hand when they weren't called on." She paused. "We've been silenced before," she said. "Not this time." The comment section lit up not with emojis, but with paragraphs, stories, people opening up about moments they held their tongues, rooms they felt they didn't belong in, truths they swallowed to survive. Crockett didn't just speak for people. She gave them back their voice. And in doing so, she reminded the country of something it had almost forgotten, that courage isn't always loud, that strength doesn't always swagger, that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is tell the truth with your whole chest. She made it clear this wasn't about left or right. This was about what kind of leadership we're willing to accept, whether we reward theater or value truth, whether we want representatives who rehearse lines or ones who remember names. Dignity over division, she said. Service over performance. Courage over compliance. The lines were shared like scripture. Teachers printed them on posters. Pastors quoted them from pulpits. One protester in Philadelphia held up a sign at a voting rights march that read, "I walk with Crockett." And, through it all, she never changed her posture, never diluted her tone. She stayed grounded because she knew this wasn't the climax. It was just a checkpoint. A reminder that change doesn't always come crashing through walls. Sometimes it walks through the front door, takes a seat, and refuses to be moved. That's what Jasmine Crockett did. And as the replay loops slowed, as the hashtags cooled, one image lingered, not the takedown, not the stare, not even the judge's nod. It was her walking out of the chamber, head high, gaze forward. Alone, but not. Quiet, but never silenced. And if you think that was powerful, what comes next in her fight will blow you away. Judge Posner wasn't the only one amazed. We all were. In a chamber built for spectacle, it was the truth that stole the show. Not shouted, not dramatized, just spoken with clarity, courage, and conviction. Jasmine Crockett didn't just respond. She redefined the rules, and in doing so, she reminded every single one of us. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest sometimes. It's just the one with the microphone. But not this time. This time, the truth got the mic, and it stayed there. So here's your move. If you felt something watching her dismantle the noise and reclaim the moment, don't let that energy fade. Share this video. Subscribe to stay in this fight. And tell us in the comments, what moment made you proud? What line hit you the hardest? What story in your life mirrors hers? Because this isn't just about a viral clip. It's about momentum. And voices like Jasmine's voices that speak, for the silenced need backup, so be part of it. Be part of the movement that rewards truth over performance. That amplifies representation. That makes moments like this more than rare, makes them routine. And as the credits roll and the music fades, remember, this wasn't a mic drop, this was the first note of something louder. We'll see you at the next hearing, and trust us, you won't want to miss what happens when Jasmine Crockett steps up to the mic again.